The steam locomotive is the machine that made the American railroad possible. It transformed this country from a primitive agricultural economy to the industrial powerhouse of the 19th and 20th centuries. The first steam locomotives were developed in England in the 18 teens and 20s, and by 1825, a relatively reliable form of steam locomotive had been developed and placed in service in northern England. By 1830, the first formal American railroad, the Baltimore and Ohio, had started construction, and by 1831 they'd adopted this new machine, the steam locomotive, as its principal form of transportation. This kicked off a railroad building era, and every East Coast city sought to become the coastal connection for a network of railroads running to the interior of the United States from its port. By the 1840s, a distinctive American type of locomotive had been developed, the 440, or American Standard Locomotive. This engine came to typify the type of locomotive design necessary for operation on the simple and poorly built railroads of the United States. It had 4 pilot truck wheels, 4 large driving wheels, and no trailing truck wheels. It typically had a large spark-arresting smokestack, a whistle, a bell, a signaling device, which was an American innovation, and a headlight, because trains were the first transportation technology on land which ran day or night. By the late 1840s and early 1850s, the expansion of the railroad network demonstrated the power of this new technology. America had more railroad track than all the rest of the countries in the world combined. And the notion of manifest destiny, the idea that it was manifest, that it was obvious that the United States should occupy and develop the entire continent from coast to coast, from Atlantic to Pacific, became popular. What this required, however, was the construction of a railroad across the country, something called at the time a Pacific Railroad. By 1870, the phrase transcontinental would be coined to describe this. But there was no agreement about where such a railroad would begin or where it would end. The United States was a divided nation. The Civil War eradicated those sectional issues, and by 1862 it became imperative that the West, and in particular California and Nevada, be connected to the rest of the Union. Abraham Lincoln, in the summer of 1862, signed the Pacific Railroad Act, authorizing the Central Pacific Railroad to build east from Sacramento, California, and creating the patriotically named Union Pacific Railroad to build west from the Missouri River at Omaha, Nebraska. This first railroad across the continent was completed in May 1869 on the desolate Utah uplands north of the Great Salt Lake. With the ceremonial driving of the Gold Spike, the United States was literally and symbolically linked together by bands of iron. And this created the armature upon which a dramatically expanding railroad network would transform the great American desert into the industrial and agricultural heartland of America. Several technical innovations after the American Civil War made railroad transportation safer and more efficient. The automatic or knuckle coupler gradually eliminated all the hazards that brakemen were subject to by the more primitive link and pin couplers. George Westinghouse's automatic air brake allowed trains to stop safely and efficiently, and in case a train became uncoupled or pulled apart, would stop automatically. Stronger couplings and more efficient brakes allowed heavier and longer trains to travel safely at higher speeds. This required more powerful locomotives. Locomotives could not become much wider or higher than their predecessors, so they became longer. It became the practice to put larger boilers on more wheels to transmit more power to the rails. New wheel arrangements, much larger and more capable than the former 440 and 280 freight engines, came into development at the turn of the century. The most characteristic freight locomotive wheel arrangement was the 282 or Mikado type locomotive. More engines of this type were built than any other freight wheel arrangement. Passenger locomotives of the 462 or Pacific wheel arrangement propelled heavyweight steel trains at high speed across the continent. The start of the Great Depression in 1930 put an end to the railroad's prosperity. Car loadings reduced by almost half between 1930 and 1934. At the depths of the Great Depression, not one single new steam locomotive was built for or purchased by an American railroad. America needed the railroads again during the Second World War, and the highest freight and passenger volumes in history occurred between 1940 and 1945, as the railroads were mobilized in the war effort. Nearly every soldier, nearly every ton of war materiel was transported by rail from its point of manufacture to ports of embarkation. The heaviest single passenger volume year in American railroad history was 1945, with soldiers going off to war and demobilized soldiers returning to civilian life. After World War II, competing forms of transportation, the private automobile, the motor bus, and commercial aviation began to seriously eat away at the passenger business provided by the railroads. By 1955, the railroads had also adopted diesel-electric propulsion technology to replace the aging steam locomotives. Diesel-electric locomotives, manufactured by companies like General Motors and some of the old-line locomotive builders, such as the American Locomotive Company, the Lima Locomotive Works, and the Baltimore Locomotive Works, replaced steam locomotives in wholesale numbers. In 1950, there were nearly 47,000 steam locomotives in regular common carrier service in the United States. The Norfolk and Western Railroad dropped the fires on the last steam locomotive in regular scheduled interstate common carrier service in 1960. In this 10-year period, 47,000 steam locomotives were replaced by some 36,000 more modern, more efficient diesel-electric locomotives. Today, some 1,600 steam locomotives remain in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. Nearly half are on display in parks. The balance are in museums and on tourist railroads and preserve a living link to the technology which transformed America from an agricultural province of England to the industrial power of the world. Last of the Giants is perhaps the best of the steam-era railroad documentaries in America. The UP is perhaps best known for their 4664 Challenger locomotives, the mainstay of their high-speed freight and passenger service across the Great Plains. But as World War II approached, the company needed even larger and more powerful locomotives. They contracted with the American Locomotive Company for 20 enormous engines, a new wheel arrangement, 4 884, 4 pilot truck wheels, 8 driving wheels in one locomotive section, another set of 8 drivers, and then 4 trailing truck wheels to support an enormous firebox, all located under a single boiler. And someone, we'll never know who, at the American Locomotive Company chalked the phrase "Big Boy" on the side of the smoke box of one of the first engines. These locomotives weighed 1,250,000 pounds each. They had more tractive effort, more power on the rail than any other single locomotive in the world. They were the heaviest reciprocating steam engines ever built. 5 more were constructed during the Second World War, and these powered the enormous troop trains and freight trains over Sherman Hill on the eastern part of the Union Pacific Line. After the war, Union Pacific rapidly dieselized. They converted to diesel-electric locomotives, moving away from the mechanical needs and the demands of the steam locomotive. As a result, the Union Pacific's big boys only had a relatively short service life, and all were retired by 1957.
For more than a century, the haunting voice of the iron horse echoed across the land. From the eastern seaboard, over the seemingly endless plains and through the western mountains, steam locomotives fused a sprawling landmass into a solid nation. Theirs was a call to dreamers of every age, wafting them from humdrum schoolroom or office to fancied adventures on the high iron. Lucky the boy who one day could say he had seen them in action. For by 1960, the age of steam had virtually ended, and the thrill of seeing a mammoth engine at work was to be only a happy memory of childhood. Of all the locomotives in the long history of the rails, one of the greatest was called Big Boy, a name by which the world knew an engine that closed a memorable era in Western railroading. It was the last of the giants. Built as machines to produce transportation, steam locomotives seldom were endowed with grace of line, and then never at the sacrifice of efficiency and power or speed. For those who ran them and serviced them, the 25 engines of our 4000 class climaxed American steam freight locomotive design. So Big Boy was a railroad man's everyday working tool. But it had romantic aspects, too, in the dreams of those grown-up youths who, as bankers or teachers or house painters, secretly yearned to trade places with the engineer in his cab. The sight of Big Boy fighting the grades of Wyoming Sherman Hill was, to these aficionados, a picture more treasured than any in the world's galleries. The shattering sounds from its stacks and the moan of its chime whistle more stirring than any concert hall melody. Rugged and powerful, it was on call around the clock, around the calendar, to ride a trail of steel as it drew bales and boxes and carloads of the world's goods from east to west to east again. Although its evolution began a century and a quarter before the music of this machine ever rang through Utah's Weber Canyon or drummed across the Rocky Mountain Plateau, Big Boy's true ancestors were more recent. Locomotives like Big Boy were products of grueling schedules versus little engines. When business surged ahead in the West around the turn of the century, railroads serving that territory found they needed more power for increasingly longer trains. The power problem raised by lengthening a train had long been met by adding another locomotive. Double heading saved time on urgent freight, but it also meant investment in extra locomotives, expensive machines whose periods of usefulness were subject to the rise and fall of business. Nevertheless, it was a grand sight to see a pair of husky little haulers leaving town to the tune of out-of-beat exhausts. Museum piece with its 6 churning driving wheels was new in 1890, it was considered a Samson of the rails. But that was not enough, even then, and soon 6 drivers grew to 8. Then 8 became 10. As more feet were added to the iron horse, larger cylinders were needed to power them. More steam was needed to work the cylinders. And in this jack-built house on wheels, a larger boiler to supply the steam. More power brought more weight, which, though it aided traction by pressing the drivers to the rail, required more wheels to distribute it. The longer the locomotive grew, the more it became like a centipede with a stiff neck. It had difficulty following tracks that wound with rivers and mountains. Size also was limited by bridges and tunnels designed for the smaller locomotives and cars that had been adequate in the early days. The same problem came up on European railroads. One answer to the power and size spiral was found by a Frenchman, Anatole Mallet. far from being a comic character, Mallet was a brilliant engineer. In 1889, he built a flexible locomotive. He made 2 short engine units, then joined their frames with a hinge pin. An extra pair of cylinders was added to drive the rear unit. A large boiler completed the design. Voila! The railroad world had here a new and useful piece of equipment. It bent in the middle to take curves freely. Being hinged or articulated, engines could be made longer, with more wheels to distribute the weight that was the partner of power. The first Mallet used in America, one which railroaders affectionately called Old Maud, ran on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. The Virginian and Erie railroads went Mallet one better and built locomotives with 3 engine units, powerful brutes but steam-hungry and hard to maintain. Mallet engines like Old Maud also were of the economical compound type. They used the steam twice. It came from the boiler first to the rear set of cylinders at high pressure. Then, as it expanded, it passed at lower pressure into a second and larger set before exhausting through the smokestack. In 1918, we put a number of Mallets to work on heavy grades. True to type with bulging front cylinders, these engines did a good job of pulling, but they were slow movers and hard on track. The moving parts of the front units were so large and heavy that at higher speeds the track suffered continuous and devastating hammering. Like most Western railroads, our lines stretch over long distances, and speed is essential to maintain good service. To get both the power and speed we needed, we returned in the mid-20s to the rigid frame engine. The result was the 9000 series, a locomotive of singular design. With 12 coupled driving wheels, it was the largest non-articulated engine ever built. It ran twice as fast as the Mallets, yet used less fuel. The 9000s served well on the plains, where rails curved gently. But in mountain country, where winding tracks resisted stiff-legged engines, their efficiency and power were impaired. So, as early as 1936, using roller bearings and better steels, we revived the articulated type locomotive. The result was the famous Challenger. Unlike the Mallets, the Challengers and their later somewhat refined cousins, the 3900 class, used only high-pressure steam in both sets of equal-sized cylinders. They seemed the final answer to the railroader's dream. But with the threat of World War II, still more was asked of the railroads. A greater hauling capacity was needed, and even these locomotives were found wanting. Big Boy was born of necessity. Now the stretching of the locomotive had reached its maximum. Where the Challengers and 3900s had 2 sets of 6 drivers, Big Boy had 2 groups of 8. Like its forerunners, it had 4-wheel trucks under the front cylinders to lead it through the curves, and under the cab to support the huge firebox. Whether it was booming along at 80 or drifting easy, Big Boy radiated majesty. Massive and compact, a solid workhorse, yet limber as a trotter, magnificence was paired with performance. The 4000s were the largest and heaviest of their type ever built, 132 feet long, 1.25 million pounds in weight. Every inch of Big Boy had the look of irresistible force. Enough, in fact, to pull a loaded 5.5-mile-long train on level track. Big Boy also furnished power to check the hurtling tons behind it. A common sight on trains descending Sherman Hill was a swirl of smoke streaming from every wheel as the brakes were applied. energized by compressed air from the locomotive. There was a family resemblance about Big Boy and the 3900. Heavy jowled with bulky cylinders, each had a bright eye low on a double chin of air compressors. The bell was a forelock, the pilot like a steel beard. A 3900 carried our familiar shield in the center of its face-like smokebox front, Big Boy below the headlight. A distinguishing feature of this type of articulated locomotive was the reluctant manner in which the long, rigid boiler followed the front free-swinging engine unit around a curve. Mallet's first little double-jointed locomotive had come a long way. In fact, all locomotives had long before disproved early 19th century scoffers who had said smooth driving wheels on smooth rails would spin futilely. They hadn't considered adhesion supplied by the engine's weight. Although nearly 3/4 of Big Boy's tonnage was on its 68-inch drivers, tractive power sometimes overcame even this force. Four cylinders, each larger than a 40-gallon oil drum, powered the 16 drivers. Steam at 300 pounds pressure was distributed to the cylinders by valves timed with a mechanical device that created a fascinating counterpoint in motion. The engineer controlled this complicated valve mechanism and could change the direction of travel with an auxiliary machine, the reverse gear. Life in Big Boy began in the firebox, a high-efficiency furnace so large that a human fireman could hardly shovel enough coal into it to make steam for the whistle. A mechanical stoker clawed fuel from the tender, passed it by an Archimedes screw to the firebox, then sewed it across the fire. Within the steel boiler, water circulated around more than a mile of tubes and flues that carried a red-hot hurricane to generate and superheat the steam. With Big Boy's size, 2 stacks were needed. Hoods to deflect the smoke and permit a clear view from the cab often were used by the engineer. Most of a steam locomotive's life was spent in or near its own special den, the roundhouse. Though sturdy and reliable, even Big Boy often needed attention and service. Better than most engines, its availability for pulling trains still was relatively low. The roundhouse rights began at the end of the run when the fire was dumped and the grates cleaned and cooled. A never-ending job was that of removing ashes cleared from Big Boy's garage-sized firebox. Good maintenance required frequent washing to flush away the grit and grease that always gathered on a steam engine. The locomotive first was pushed through a shower, then finished by hand. After a round of inspection that included a search for leaking steam connections, Big Boy was ready for the roundhouse. Once inside, the engine might be there only a few hours while the boiler was emptied and washed. But if heavy repairs were needed, it went to the back shop for perhaps a month, where first it was disassembled with the aid of a heavy-duty crane. One task was fitting Big Boy with new shoes, steel tires for its drivers, a periodic precision job for back shop machinists with special skills and tools. After being machined, the tire was ready for mounting. It had been bored about 1/8 of an inch smaller than the diameter of the wheel center. In a spectacular operation, it was made to fit. Gas flames heated and expanded the tire until it was larger than the wheel. After the tire was driven into place, and before it cooled and shrank to grip the wheel securely, it was gauged for correct position. In another part of the shop, the pipe fitters would be busy with Big Boy's boiler. Tubes and flues, as well as another mile of piping that made up the superheater, often had to be repaired or replaced. There were very few small parts on a 4000. The tools were equally large and heavy, and the work was hard. It was a rare breed who maintained these giants, like the foreman who retired after spending his entire working life in a roundhouse, then returned to visit nearly every day, like the machinist who set valves on Big Boys all day, then spent much of the evening building a model railroad at home. To ready a locomotive for the road, once the fire had been rekindled and the boiler was full of steam, all that remained to be done was to add fuel and water. Into the elephantine tender were tumbled 28 tons of coal, enough to heat the average house for many seasons. For the thirsty boiler, the 86-ton tender also carried 25,000 gallons of water, more than enough for a good-sized home swimming pool. With a heavy train, a 4000 often went through most of its food and drink within the first half of a 57-mile trip over Sherman Hill. It took many people many hours to return Big Boy to the job of moving freight over the main line. Standing docile as the running orders were read, only the quick-breathing fire, the droning generator, and the clanking, wheezing air pumps bespoke its latent power. But once the engineer on his hero throne had cracked the throttle to start the tons a-rolling, it took some doing to hold Big Boy back. Big Boy was a king of the rails who came to life in a fusion of steam and steel. He proclaimed his presence with a rhythmic cough and a throaty cry, belching smoke and trailing steam. He pounded through his domain with a flashing and spinning of rods and wheels. His was an awesome majesty, but he was the last of his line to be toppled by new monarchs of the track. In the 18 years that the Big Boys reigned, they ran up a total of nearly 26 million miles, hauling billions of tons of freight as prime movers along our wartime lifeline, later carrying the goods of peace and a rising economy. During his final years, Big Boy made his last stand on a short but busy section of our main line, tough, demanding Sherman Hill, and then it was only during the annual fall rush, a few weeks a year. Even as the last wisps of steam were vanishing from railroading's yesterday, Big Boy's successors were ushering in a speed and space-hungry era. He gave way as electronics, jet power, and the atom were put to work on the iron trail. So Big Boy marked the end of big steam railroading in the West. He was not abandoned because he failed at what he was designed to do, but because a more efficient breed of iron horse appeared in the evolution of railroad locomotives. The vital link between East and West that was forged with steam engines is made even stronger today with modern motive power. The day has no end for the railroad, but whatever locomotive progress shall put at the head of tomorrow's train, the rumble and roar of Big Boy will seem still to echo from the high country of southern Wyoming.
Railroads were once leaders in industrial research. Improvements to materials like iron and steel, better fuels and lubricants, and new types of construction and equipment were all developed and tested by railroad laboratories and university programs financed by the railroad industry. The 225,000 miles described in the title of this film is the entire American railroad network, a testing area for innovations of every kind. Subtitled The Headline Story of Railroad Research, this film describes the types of changes that brought railroads from the days of steam into the modern era. New methods of propulsion, couplers, brakes, loading equipment, refrigeration, wheels, signals, and communication are described. These were new in the 1950s and have become the standard for today's railroads.
I've done a lot of traveling on trains, and I've often marveled at the streamlined comforts and conveniences they offer for passenger travel, at their speed, safety, and general reliability. And watching freight trains go by, I've often wondered at them, too. At the way cars from all railroads are likely to be found in the trains of any railroad, and where the cars come from, and what they haul, and where they're going, and a lot of other things about how the railroads handle the nation's big freight job. Hardly more than a century ago, over dusty trails or dirt roads, passengers and freight moved on horseback or in covered wagons. Then came a new kind of transportation, the railroads. Here was the real beginning of America's greatness, of her expansion and development in mining, agriculture, and industry. Here was the economic foundation upon which our nation was to build. Well, that's the assignment the editor gave me, to get the story behind the story of modern railroading. And I'm glad he did, because it gave me a chance to go backstage for a close look behind the scenes of railroading, to find out just how railroads became the great transportation system of today. And here's a part of the story as I found it, in the words of the men doing the research that's back of the tremendous advances railroads have made through the years.
Yes, the railroads are always looking for better things and for better ways of doing things. Their story of unending research, invention, and ingenuity began with the beginning of railroads and goes on today as never before. My work is on the campus of the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago, in the Central Research Laboratory of the Association of American Railroads, nerve center of the widespread job of railroad research. We do for railroads collectively things which can be done more efficiently and economically than by railroads individually, so that the traveling and shipping public can have faster, safer, more economical service. This job of research is of vital importance in the constant effort to improve everything it takes to run a railroad. Consider the very foundation of railroading, for example, the track over which trains operate.
To the naked eye, it looks pretty much the same as it did years ago. But through research, every part from the rail to the ballast and even the subgrave beneath the track has been made better. Rail itself is heavier and stronger today to keep pace with the constantly growing loads it supports. It got that way through years of testing in laboratories and out along the track under operating conditions. America's 225,000 miles of railroad is available to try out under test conditions new ways of construction, new types of equipment, new methods of railroad operation, making this the biggest proving ground in the world. Research and experience have led to better design and improved metallurgy, so that today's rail has a service life 50% greater than that of 30 years ago. Track as a whole is kept in condition by machines and methods that have revolutionized maintenance of way work. Men working on track today have the use of machines that often resemble weird contraptions out of a dream. Equipment such as this has lifted much of the heavy work from men's shoulders, at the same time getting more and better work done at less cost. This ballast cleaner, for instance. Mechanical hands methodically scoop up the dirty ballast to be carried by continuous belt up into the mechanism where it is cleaned. The ballast then emerges as good as new and is replaced in an operation that is now completely mechanical. But to do its job, ballast must be packed under and around the cross ties. Research and testing have brought about the development of extremely effective ballast tampers. Metal fingers hammer the ballast to ensure smooth, even riding by establishing firm foundations for ties and rails. Still another result of prolonged research has been the development of the rail detector car. Mounted on the underside of each unit, directly over the rail, are powerful electric magnets, which locate any possible internal defects in the rail. When a defect is spotted, the exact location is marked for immediate rail replacement. But what the railroads are doing to improve and maintain track through research is just part of the overall story. Another part, just as vital, is that of the vast changes being made in the equipment rolling over the track.
From the days of the little old teapot engines of early railroads to the giant locomotives of today, there's been steady progress in railroad motive power. Steam, electric, diesel, turbine-powered engines, and perhaps tomorrow, even atomic power. But to me, the steam locomotive has always represented the adventure and romance of early American history. And the steam locomotive is still on the job, an important factor in providing low-cost, dependable transportation. But the development of the diesel-electric locomotive has become one of the most important steps in railroad progress. I was surprised to find out that the first diesel locomotive capable of pulling a freight train at today's required speed went into service as recently as 1941. That was a great step in the most rapid changeover in motive power history. For today's diesels perform about 3/4 of all railroad transportation services. When I checked into the why and wherefore of this great changeover, the answer first and foremost was cutting down operating costs with greatly increased efficiency. I found that the diesel burns less fuel, can start heavier loads, can pull them at higher sustained speeds, and needs fewer repairs. The development of the steam, diesel, electric, and now the gas turbine locomotive is a good example of how the railroad industry adapts and applies to its own needs the results of the research of related industries. To most of us, there's nothing particularly exciting or romantic about the railroad freight car. And yet without it, the America we know could never have come into being. For the freight car is the moving element in the world's greatest assembly line, railroads. carrying the raw products and manufactured commodities of a whole continent, the veritable lifeline of a nation.
Carrying more tons of freight, more miles than all other forms of transportation combined. That's the day-by-day record of America's premier mechanized workhorse, the modern railroad freight car. It, too, is a product of study and experimentation. Much of this experimentation, like testing any other mechanical device designed for railroad use, cannot be confined to the four walls of a laboratory. So, railroads and manufacturers have cooperated in operating complete trains, rolling laboratories for road tests, carried out under actual operating conditions, sometimes at speeds as high as 100 miles an hour and more. Here's one such laboratory train with which the railroads test high-speed freight car wheels and trucks designed to lessen vibration and increase stability. Another working part in which great progress has been made is in braking, or the power to stop. I've had an opportunity to visit the laboratories and see these testing dynamometers in action. This combination of testing in the laboratory and on the road is practical research at its best, trying out different kinds of brakes under all conditions, all with a view of ensuring the safest, most comfortable rail service for the traveler and the most dependable and economical service for the shipper. The AAR Draft Gear Laboratory. Here's a specially designed machine for drop testing draft gear, those vital parts behind car couplers which cushion and protect the car and its contents against stress and strain. That's a 27,000-pound weight you're looking at, simulating conditions far more severe than would normally be found in actual service. It's dropped from different heights on the draft gear under test. The one thing we freight men know above everything else is that a damaged shipment means financial loss to everyone concerned. And conversely, better packaging, loading, and handling spell more dollars in the pockets of shippers, carriers, and receivers alike.
Concentrated inquiry into the science of packaging, breakage, loading. That's part of the everyday program at the Central Research Lab in Chicago. What happens to lading inside freight cars during switching operations, while in transit? These are some of the questions that have led to extensive railroad research in damage prevention. And out of this research have emerged new methods of practice and usage to be adopted on an industry-wide basis. Coupling tests tell us what we try to find out about impact effect on lading and how better to build cars to cushion the shocks of movement. And railroads do something about the weather, too. Some of the earliest uses of artificial refrigeration were in the movement of perishable products to market. And today, the aim of our research is to keep on improving the methods which help to deliver fresh fruits, vegetables, meats, dairy products, all kinds of perishables to all parts of the country and get them there fresh as the day they were picked. This means constant experimenting and testing by our refrigeration engineers and technicians in the search for lighter, more efficient insulation. And again, our work leaves the lab and is carried forward in transit. Here's a string of refrigerator cars being prepared for a cross-country test. Wiring and special recording mechanisms installed. On the trip, temperature and other conditions carefully recorded for later analysis with the view to improvement of car design, insulation, forced air ventilation and circulation, heat and water vapor transmission through the insulation. All to the end that the railroads can go on doing an even better job of supplying every part of the nation with fresh, healthful foods the year round. An innovation in the handling of perishables in transit. Complete mechanization of icing and re-icing. Self-propelled units servicing 2 lines of cars at one time under one-man control, thus cutting down train delays at re-icing stations.
Getting the most out of trains and tracks calls for many things, like, for instance, communications and signals. Railroad signals have come a long way from the time when a colored ball hoisted to the top of a pole signaled that the track ahead was clear. Today, trains run 2 million miles every day on America's railroads, under the world's most complete, most effective, and safest system of traffic control. Basic in this traffic control is the automatic block signal system, by means of which a train in a block or section of track reports its presence to all approaching trains. This is done automatically through electronic operation of signals, which tell the engineers of other trains whether to stop, to proceed with caution, or to go ahead at authorized speed. On sections of line equipped with centralized traffic control, all trains automatically report their exact position and movements through lights on a map on a central control board. Simply by moving little levers on this board, the operator you see here can set signals and throw switches that govern the movement of trains as far as 200 miles away. Through his control board, he lines up signals and switches which are so interlocked as to make it impossible to set up conflicting routes. Special devices are also being used to control the movement of cars in busy yards and terminals, the places where trains are made up or reclassified, the hearts that pump the flow of commerce out across the nation. Here in a push-button yard, a locomotive shoves the cars of an incoming freight up to the top of the hump. There, the cars are uncoupled, singly or in groups, and the force of gravity takes charge. Gravity controlled by the twin marvels of electronics and pneumatics. As the cars roll downhill, their speed is governed by car retarders, whose slowing down pressure against the wheels is adjusted from a control board in a tower. As the cars roll on, they are routed into their proper tracks by switches which are thrown through push-button controls. Two-way radio communication connects all parts of the yard with the control tower to further speed up the movement of cars through great terminals. These great car interchange centers point up dramatically the importance of another product of railroad research, the standardization of working parts, which makes it possible for any freight car of any railroad to be operated in the trains of any other railroad. That fact is at the foundation of our continent-wide flow of commerce. And it is but one of the results of railroad research in better cars and locomotives, better signals and communications, better tracks and terminals, and the better methods of railroading, which, combined, explain why today's freight trains turn out 3 times as much transportation service in an hour as the average train of 30 years ago. My story is just about finished, but the railroad story itself goes on, being written day by day in laboratories and shops and out along the tracks of individual railroads working together through the Association of American Railroads. Still other chapters are being written in university and commercial labs and within the industries that supply the railroads. As a reporter, I came away with this guiding idea, that in the railroad industry, the innovation of yesterday is the commonplace of today, and that the best of today is not good enough for tomorrow. This is the creed of the Railroad Research Program, the heart of railroad service to the American traveler and shipper.
The Flight of the Century recounts the preparation and operation of the Central's crack train from Chicago to New York. We see the preparation of the train, from the selection of the finest fruits and vegetables, meat and bread, fish, placed aboard the dining car to be prepared at 70 miles an hour for the passengers. The cars are scrupulously cleaned, the exterior is washed, the brass is polished, and the train itself is open for passengers. The New York Central's distinctive red carpet, a symbol of the train, is unrolled at the LaSalle Street station, and the passengers board for their journey to the Atlantic coast. We begin with a sequence of the DeWitt Clinton, the first locomotive of the New York Central's first predecessor railroad, which in 1831 was only capable of traveling at 17 miles an hour. Then the film fast forwards a century to the early 1930s, with the 20th Century Limited, with speeds in excess of 70 miles an hour on a regular basis. This is symbolic of the dramatic transformation of the railroad industry in 100 years, from being a primitive, some would say cute and charming, but obscure system of transportation, to the lifeline of the nation by the era of the Great Depression. Life aboard a passenger train is something that people of a younger generation have no familiarity with today. The upper and lower berths of the open section sleeping car, the individual bedrooms, were all part of the everyday dynamic of travel by train. Dinner in the diner was a much cherished part of rail travel. Note also the red caps, the porters, the dining car stewards, the cooks in the diners are all African Americans. The Pullman Company began to hire black men in the 1870s for service aboard its sleeping cars. And railroad employment became perhaps the best occupation that many African American males could seek in the period between 1880 and the 1950s. A centerpiece of our story is the locomotive which made the 70-mile-an-hour plus speeds of the 20th Century Limited possible. The New York Central originated a style of locomotive called the Hudson, after the Hudson River, which had a wheel arrangement of 4 pilot truck wheels, 6 large driving wheels, and 4 trailing truck wheels to support the firebox. These engines are considered by many to be the definitive high-speed passenger locomotives built in America. As the train nears the end of its run and approaches New York City, the steam locomotives are replaced by electric locomotives, because the city of New York at the turn of the century prohibited steam engines on Manhattan Island in order to reduce the smoke and pollution from the steam engines. And so the last several miles were pulled by silent and efficient electric locomotives through the tunnels under Manhattan to New York's spectacular Grand Central Station.
The 20th century is never old because it is constantly reborn. Daily the command is issued, make up the century. A command that takes more than 3 hours to fulfill. Not an inch is neglected inside or out. No rooms in home or hostelry are scrubbed and rubbed daily to such a point of freshness and inviting cleanliness. The century is immaculate when a veritable army of experienced workers have finished their appointed task. Trained according to a carefully planned routine, this human machine of many units gets into motion, methodically, quietly, each individual attending to the detail entrusted to him, each operation bringing the great train one step nearer perfected assembly. Precision, skill, care, dispatch. traveling public little realizes the unfailing service that is exercised behind the scenes in order that the 20th century may warrant the respect and preference of people who are accustomed to fine appointments in their homes. Fresh from daily sources of supply, here they lie, foods of all kinds, waiting for their allotment to the century's dining service. Fruits, crisp, clean vegetables, choice beverages, meats of the best, condiments, products right from the dairy, the widest assortment of commissary supplies, selected for catering to the taste of people who are bred to gracious living. No hotel is more ready for satisfying the epicure's every want and whim. The quality of these fine foods is matched by their meticulously careful handling, with every precaution for cleanliness. From the moment they leave shelf and refrigerator to their final deposit in kitchen and pantry of the dining car. Everyone at his post, immaculate. As the proud Limited is rolled into LaSalle Street Station. With carpets laid for those who are about to enjoy its bright and spotless accommodation. There is a period each day of the year known as the Century Hour. Here in Chicago, as in New York and Boston, people gauge their movements, their appointments, their mail by observing the Century Hour. The hour arrives down to the last split second. And we are on our way. The 20th Century Limited, Queen Train of the New York Central Line. from Chicago, we pause at Elkhart, where the Century received the first of endless inspections under the skilled eyes of hundreds of men, all along its speeding length. Early evening, just a few minutes at Toledo. Time enough for securing today's papers from New York, or for a short turn up and down the platform, while still another corps of workers busy themselves at the Century's never-stopping inspection. Then, once more, the Century rolls on. Experience has taught the guest of the Century to look forward with zest to the dining hour. The very appearance of one's table is stimulating. Selections are made, glasses raised for gracious toast. Professional service by professionals, trained in the serving of fine food. Appetite-teasing delicacies top off the famous Century dinner. As soft lights glow, comes the fall of night. Some indulge in their own forms of diversion. While for others, retiring time arrives. Fresh, clean, and invite repose. In drawing rooms, compartments, individual bedrooms, and spacious berths, refreshing rest is assured on the Century. Asleep or awake, Century travelers revel in the freshness of pure filtered air. In every car, day or night, winter or summer. Ideal traveling comfort, for the 20th century is air-conditioned from end to end. Shortly before the midnight hour, the eternal vigilance of waiting men again inspect at countless posts, while signal lights and every known trackside safety device stand further guard, here as everywhere along the route, including the exclusive automatic stop, which outdoes even human factors of safe operation. And here it is that 2 centuries pass in the night. One bound eastward, and the other speeding from the Atlantic to Chicago. Here Boston section leads the New York Central line. And proceeds up the main line of the Boston and Albany toward its destination. The New York section turns down for its final run along the course of the broad-flowing Hudson, famed in history and literary fable. A glimpse of West Point, majestic on the opposite shore, cradle of our Army's commissioned staff, nestled high above the river that rolls down to the sea. Framing vistas of supreme beauty in our windows, as we arise and prepare in comfort and ease for the occupations of the day. Entering the Park Avenue Tunnel, an open, airy, spacious passage to the northern part of the city. While above us, mighty monarchs of architecture tower to the clouds, and streets pulse with a surge of a new day's task. Here, in the cathedral-like spaces of the terminal itself, throbbing heart of the nation's metropolis, we have arrived, the way of ways, New York, by way of the 20th century limits.
Railroad safety and efficiency has come a long way thanks to the railroad researchers who are dedicated to finding the safest, fastest, most economical way to get things done. Join the scientists in their labs and on board as they investigate every aspect of transportation technology with an eye toward progress and innovation. From the simple wheel that doesn't need steering to the giant diesel locomotives, watch science in action and get a glimpse of proposed jet-age wonders like nuclear-powered trains and rocket cars without wheels. This film looks at the science behind the control systems, communications, data processing, integrated shipping, and automated freight yards. From containerization to diesel engines, we'll see the industry experts work to improve each part of train, commerce, and travel. And finally, experience the triumphs of their efforts as we ride aboard modernized passenger trains.
Of American cities in this age of science and technology reflect the ingenuity and lively spirit of the almost 200 million people who are citizens of the world's most productive nation. Today they look forward to an era of unprecedented change. They know that in a free competitive world, they must move with the times and plan far ahead of the times, adapting themselves to the demands of tomorrow through the use of every technological and scientific development. In the American future, our national purpose requires that we have an efficient, low-cost system of transportation. This means that our railroads, which have been part of our past, must also be part of our future. As always, the story of railroad progress will be written by a dynamic industry whose emblem is the flanged wheel. Along with the rails on which it turns, the flanged wheel is unique to railroad transportation. It is the only wheel that needs no steering. And in the long history of man's development of the wheel with the flange, less than 2 centuries old, is technically the newest wheel of all. It has always been an important American wheel and will continue to be an important wheel in the American future. To exact from the flanged wheel the efficiency required by the world of tomorrow, and to assure Americans of the safety and comfort of rail transportation today, the railroad industry has joined with science in a union that is making news. Research centers are staffed by scientists who, like locomotive engineers and conductors, are, in the fullest sense, railroad men. The technician may be an employee of a railroad or of one of the manufacturers who supply the roads each year with over $1 billion worth of everything from bridges to brake shoes. By himself, the researcher rarely finds the answer to a scientific problem. But he may discover the one bit of information that makes the answers of all the other researchers fall into place as the long hoped-for solution. The free exchange of scientific information is essential for success.
Protect the reactor. Can you get enough shielding to protect against external radiation?
Well, we have 10 feet here, Bob, but we can work in, and here...
This exchange is one of the strengths of railroad research.
Can you get a good control rod mechanism?
Yes, these boron rods here would be controlled as the dotted line shows from the cab. And
the discussion here is about the practicability of an atomic-powered locomotive. What other jet-age wonders lie ahead? Well, one revolutionary concept of passenger transportation in the future would eliminate the wheel entirely. At 500-mile-per-hour speeds, rocket cars glide on a film of air forced through holes in a device that hugs the rails. Underway are design studies for cars holding from 40 to 200 passengers. The lever trains are one of the many railroad transportation projects for the future, now in the engineering and research laboratories of our country. Atomic research techniques are being used widely every day. Isotope studies of lubricating oils go on in the radiology lab at one research center. Stress research goes on in another. How to stow newsprint safely during transit is the purpose of an impact test. What happens concerns the railroad as much as the shipper. Remember a few years ago how cars used to bang together when the train stopped and started? The bang of the drop hammer is loud, but the coupling of car to car on our railroads is hardly noticeable. The result of research into the causes of strain and stress. Stress and strain are inherent in moving parts. They are common to all forms of transportation. The safety, reliability, and comfort of modern rail transportation is due to the industry's constant study of these factors. Young people have always been fascinated by railroads. This is in the American tradition.
Here we are determining the stresses on diesel locomotive wheels. This is a small part of the research program being carried on by this laboratory and by other railroad research groups.
Groups of high school and college science students are welcome in the research laboratories. For today, as always, youth has the greatest stake in the future of our railroads. Outside the research center, in yard and shop, applied science makes the railroad wheel more efficient. Ultrasonic waves inspect the axle. Echo-scoping, they call it. The flange is inspected by an electronic sentinel. Even the smallest defect shows up as the wheel moves over the sawtooth detector. A flanged wheel must roll evenly on the rails. The wheel truing machine grinds away worn places in the tread and flange. Wheel truing a giant diesel locomotive is something like a blacksmith putting new shoes on a horse without taking the old ones off. In such ways, applied science stands guard over the flanged wheel and guarantees the safety, comfort, and efficiency of railroad transportation. As with the wheel, so with the rails, for it's upon them that the wheels of the future roll. Applied science has proved that the smoothest riding track for passengers and freight is a continuous welded rail. That's why the railroads are laying so much of it. The modern railroad is forever renewing itself. Somewhere on the system, new tracks are always being laid. A railroad is always the latest model, no less than a new automobile, truck, ship, or airplane. But a railroad cannot shut down an assembly line and retool from the ground up. Nevertheless, without the fanfare of publicity and promotion, a railroad achieves the same status in its own way as the trains go through on schedule. Like circus parade elephants in command of their keepers, each machine performs a task as short-length sections of track are replaced by new quarter-mile ribbons of welded rail. The toil of sweating Gandhi dancers, laboring with their pickaxes on the section gang of yesterday, is but a legend to the track worker moving forward at his steady but comfortable pace in the rail-laying procession of today. Wherever they turn, the flanged wheels roll toward the future over a track structure that, because of science and engineering, is not only efficient, but safe. In what other ways does railroad science assure us of a record of safety unmatched by any other form of transportation? Here's one, a trackside cell, sensitive to infrared rays from overheated journal boxes. Through microwave and the railroad's radio network, the report is flashed to the central recording room. Into this quiet room, scores of ever-alert eyes, on duty night and day, scanning the wheels as they fly by, feed the electronic information that enables the railroads to get cargo there safely and on time. The officer on duty may get in touch with the speeding train by radio telephone.
The train passing Fulville northbound. Come in, please.
154.
Hello, 154. This is
The electronic bearing inspection system is an example of modern applied science working for railroad safety. The slogan, Safety First, originated with the railroads. Today, 30,000 miles of railroad network are operated by CTC, Centralized Traffic Control, transportation's most fully developed system of scheduling traffic. An engineer may control the speed of his particular train, but he, in turn, is guided by the CTC dispatcher. The dispatcher isn't aware of passing scenery, but more than the engineer, he sees the overall pattern of traffic. Somewhere on the system, two trains are approaching. The switches that will open, the speed to be run, are synchronized and controlled by a push button perhaps 300 miles away from the scene of action. Bearing priceless lives and valuable cargoes, our trains today pass safely by day and night, thanks to a marvel of electronic science. CTC is but one of the electronic machines which help run the modern railroad. Others, remote from traffic control, are more familiar as they process the checks of the millions of Americans whose income, in one way or another, is derived from our railroads. Modern railroading's largest electronic machine is the biggest electronic machine to be developed by any branch of the transportation industry, or by any industry. Yet, the tip of an index finger tells it what to do, even though it's about the size of a jet airport. It's difficult to conceive of an automated freight classification yard as a machine. Yet it is a machine, even though far too big to be enclosed in a box with a lid on top. What is its purpose? Like a post office, the classification yard is a sorting center. The freight cars are like letters. The tracks are the pigeonholes. The hump conductor is the sorter. Once he has checked the switch list to find out what goes where and the cars are uncoupled, the process of sorting becomes automatic, even though each one of the objects being sorted weighs not half an ounce, but several tons. The scientists and engineers who conceived and designed the automated classification yard seized upon nature's most familiar phenomenon, the force of gravity, and through electronics harnessed it to their needs. Meanwhile, a computer memorizes the destination of the hundreds of entering cars and sets the switches so that each will find its own way to the correct outbound track. A pretty girl strolling along a downtown street is the focus of no less attention than a freight car rolling down the hump. An electronic eye makes note of its rollability. A detector estimates its weight. Another notes the speed. Such data and more are received into the circuits of the yard's electronic brain. Within a millisecond, the computer integrates the information and sends out the impulses that instruct retarders along the track to allow the car just enough unspent gravitational force to propel it across the switches and into the proper outgoing slot, where it will meet up with its new traveling companions. As the wheels of each new train roll on to their destination, word of each car is passed to freight car service bureaus. Car information is transmitted to control centers over each railroad system of leased wires, and more today by microwave. But it is in communications and data processing that the railroads, more than other branches of the transportation industry, have today embraced the potentialities of electronic science and taken advantage of them. This one science alone has brought far-reaching changes to every American railroad. The process is continuing. And so the flanged wheels of our cars and trains move more surely, more safely, faster. Today, over 1.5 million freight cars are circulating on the railroads. And everywhere, businessmen are planning schedules around the arrival or departure of freight cars with their goods. Where's my car? Many times daily, customers concerned with shipping everything from artichokes to zinc ask this question. And just as many times a day, the customer gets his answer in the moment it takes to feed the question into the brain of the electronic computer.
Yes, sir. Your car left Chattanooga on train number 153 and will be on your siding tomorrow morning.
Serving our nation's transportation requirements are over 200,000 miles of railway lines. Increasingly, the rubber-tired wheels of highway trucking fleets are riding the network of American rails. The marriage of the wheels symbolizes a brand new concept in the science of transportation. No longer does a railroad serve simply as a rail system. Now, it is an integral part of a transportation system. Anything can be carried anywhere, and at low cost. Piggyback, in which the wheels stay on the trailers, is one technique of the new integrated shipping in which trucks leave the highway for the rails. With another method, the wheels stay behind. Whatever the name, integrated shipping, rail plus road, means that a manufacturer, however far from the tracks his plant may be, takes advantage of a dependable and cost-saving service from door to door. Door to door, as a concept of railroad service, is growing in significance as we approach new transport horizons. The container, developed by the railroad industry and containing goods in less than carload lots, is the key. Containerization actually goes beyond the door. A pickup can be made inside the factory at the end of the assembly line. Delivery, on schedule, can be made within the warehouse, right next to the stockroom shelves. The goods remaining untouched during miles and days of safe transit across the land. And through containerization, rail services and those of the trucking lines and ships can be combined. Each contributes its own advantages to the moving of goods, complementing, not substituting, for each other. So, in the competitive American tradition, through containerization, railroads are meeting the transportation challenges of our dynamic age. Railroad men have always said that they can carry anything, a claim tested and proven in wartime when the railroads are charged with carrying everything. It's true today. A freight train is an inventory of our nation's wealth, of mind,
mines, forests, factories. Transportation evolves as science and industry evolve by changing concepts and techniques. But our modern railroads also regard transportation as business. The needs of industry in our changing world are reflected in up-to-date rolling stock. Item, a super flat car with depressed center, 121 feet long, for turbo generators, gross weight almost 500 tons. Today, meat on the hoof travels upstairs and down, while meat on the hook and vegetables and fruit travel across the country in reefers at precise temperatures. Covered hopper cars carrying 100 tons of grain. An automobile showroom on wheels, equipped with roller bearings. This spectacular new automobile car, designed and built by the railroads, is widely in demand by the automotive industry today. And speaking of giants, king-size tank cars with capacity for 30,000 gallons are available for the chemical, food, and petroleum industries. Railroading power is summed up by the diesel locomotive. Almost 30,000 are on the rails today. The dieselization of the railroads is a motive power revolution, as yet unparalleled in other areas of transportation. The rapid changeover from steam power to diesel has meant a technological thinking out, which still goes on, of many new ways to do old things, from taking on fuel and sand to taking a shower bath. The modern train traveler knows he's comfortable, safe, and will arrive on time. But he's not apt to be aware of how much the relaxation he feels in rail travel is due to the industry's awareness of small ways in which railroading can benefit from science and technology. Yet, the end results are all about the passenger. The dome car, made possible through the development of light metals, was unknown a few years ago. Now it's not uncommon in long-distance travel. And so, with air conditioning, background music, glare-proof glass, random examples in the passenger field of what is happening on the industry's march to the future with science. Watching people enjoying themselves on the train reminds one of a verse by the famous American poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. It begins, "There isn't a train I wouldn't take, no matter where it's going." No matter where it's going. Well, today, America's railroads are moving forward, in tempo with the changing, growing nation, with the men of the railroads planning ahead as science rides the high iron.
Operation Fast Freight is a look at the Norfolk and Western Railroad at the end of the steam era. We have a glimpse here of early modern railroading. The cars, the basic technology, most of the things we see in this film we recognize today. They're still a part of the railroad scene in the early 21st century. But the steam locomotives are carryovers from an earlier time. And lots of the infrastructure and support systems that are depicted are unique to steam locomotion and have disappeared almost without a trace from the American industrial landscape today. We see crew members riding on the tops of freight cars to apply the brakes by hand, a practice which has been prohibited for nearly 20 years. We see heavy drag freights propelled by slow, powerful steam locomotives, a type of railroading which has become almost extinct. What is endearing and instructive about this film is that it captures the last moment of a technology which had powered American trains for nearly a century and a half. Before the last fires were dropped in 1960, the Norfolk and Western was the last vestige, the last hang-on of the once extensive coal-powered railroad network that fueled America. So we see the last flicker, the last remnant of a once bright flame preserved in this Appalachian setting as the Norfolk and Western is preparing to convert from the steam locomotives that it depended upon to the new diesel locomotives.
NW 50, 450 out. It's any night in the week, rain or shine, at the Norfolk and Western Joyce Avenue Yard in Columbus. And they're making up time freight 86, eastbound for Portsmouth, Ohio, Williamson and Bluefield, West Virginia, Roanoke and Norfolk, Virginia. NW 50, 450 couples into its right place. Couples into time freight 86. On this road, time freights move with the precision of crack passenger trains. I don't know. I've had 30 years on the Norfolk and Western. I've seen men and equipment move practically anything that has reason to roll over these rails. There's the highball. Let's go. It's 9 o'clock and 86 is getting out of town. When 86 moves, the product of the land moves along with her. The word goes out. The telegraph sends the news. 86 is on her way through the night.
N&W time freights speed through a rich, progressive six-state area: Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Maryland. This is the land of plenty. The Norfolk and Western uses the words precision transportation when speaking of its service. That's more than a slogan, it's an accurate description. Over a century of railroading, thousands of skilled, loyal men and women, finest equipment money can buy or men can build, sound operation, cooperation with every shipper. It adds up to dependable freight service. People rely upon the railroad to move their products to market. They depend on the railroad for the distribution of food. They depend on the railway to empty their bulging barns of bright leaf tobacco. When the purebred steers are ready to move, the shippers turn to the N&W. The lumbermen know that the road will move their fragrant stacks of pine and upland hardwoods to market. Behind this diversification of cargo are the N&W's extensive studies on freight handling, packing, and loading. The railroad provides the proper power, and there's a car for every job, designed to haul any product safely, dependably, and swiftly. The railroad has the equipment, but most important of all are the people who operate it. In every station along the line, the local agent is the Norfolk and Western. He's a telegrapher, a railroader, and chances are he's a well-respected man in the business and social life of his community. Your smallest shipment will receive his personal attention. Your box of family belongings will be shipped out with care and with dispatch. Your shipment moves from person to person, each one an integral part of the Norfolk and Western system. In the same fashion, the general agents are trained to serve you. Conveniently located all over the United States, they anticipate your car needs, plan for loading, advise on rates, routes, and schedules. If your shipment is export, import, coastal, or intercoastal, the foreign freight agent is ready to help you. The great piers at Norfolk are part of the system. Among them is Pier N, newest of the lot. $6 million spent on the largest single-deck pier on the Atlantic coast. You're provided with every modern facility for the rapid, safe handling of your freight at piers that are designed to handle every type and size of vessel and cargo. Flags of all nations from ports of the seven seas meet in this great harbor. Norfolk is the gateway to markets of the world and one of the world's finest year-round ice-free harbors. You'll get personal service when you deal with the people who are the Norfolk and Western.
The shipments are beginning to move out, load by load, car by car, on all the rails that spread out through the system. We know they need that coal to fire the stacks of industry. The riveters will get to work when that girder gets there. The mills will grind when those cars of grain arrive. The department store will open when the carpeting is delivered from that modern rug factory. The The shifters and the yard engines pick up the single cars, the strings of 2 and 3, and the local freights begin to build up. They hurry out of the stations, traveling the branch lines from every point on the compass. One thing that boosts them along is centralized traffic control. Trains moving from the east and from the west, moving fast. The position of every train in the district shows on the CTC board. With switch controls and signals, the dispatcher can keep them right under his thumb. Time was when such an operation could be dangerous and slow. Today, the dispatcher designates a siding, the trains pass without stopping. There's no lost motion, and the entire operation is handled in complete safety. CTC is an amazing improvement in railroading. The big parade is on. The pressure mounts. The fast freights of the Norfolk and Western are on the move. They push their way into the big classification yards. They pile into Roanoke, Virginia, heart of the system. They steam towards Portsmouth, Ohio. And when they get there, they're made up into even bigger trains. Around the clock it happens. They wheel towards Williamson, vast assembly yard for westbound coal, right into the heart of West Virginia's great coal fields. All through the night, 86 has been pounding towards Williamson. And that's where we pick her up again. There's 50, 450, riding easy. Yep, 86 slides into the yard right on time. The minute the locomotive pulls in the clear for her replacement, inspection starts. I mean real inspection, car by car and wheel by wheel. We don't aim to have anything hold up 86. The crew is changed. A fresh engine and a caboose are coupled on. And 30 minutes after arrival, we're ready to roll. She leaves the way she came, on time. Once underway, the brakeman climbs up in the cupola to ride herd on his precious cars. And the conductor settles down to his wheel report. The report is the total train on paper and lists each car, its number, weight, and contents.
This is how a railroad keeps track of all the thousands of cars that move over it every day. It's done in the car records office. Here the wheel reports are cut up, and each car becomes a separate tab to be sorted by number and a record of its movements made. Here the charges to other roads are compiled. The wheel report is the total train, moving now through the coalfield region along Tug River. The plows cut deep into the valleys. The upland hardwoods march over the hills. Underground are vast deposits of all-purpose bituminous coal. Agriculture, industry, and king coal, and the railroad serves all three. Year after year, the Norfolk and Western plows back millions of dollars in improvements, new equipment, and maintenance. Railroad dollars, not taxpayers' dollars. Every man's a specialist on the Norfolk and Western, and every man's job is to build a better railroad. They're working for the freights of tomorrow. They have pride in the road, pride in keeping it one of the top road beds in all America. They're provided with the newest and best possible machines. Machines like this one, which tamps the ballast between and around and under the ties. The work on the line never stops. The high steel men swing girders into place on a new bridge. That bridge is a new approach to an old problem, a problem that the pioneers of the Norfolk and Western had licked once before. That bridge and this fill lead to a new tunnel through Elkhorn Mountain. A new tunnel to speed traffic and increase operating efficiency. The Norfolk and Western put $12 million into this project and cut the largest double-track railroad bore in the world, 7,000 feet long, through the mountain. And once again, the grade and curvature have been reduced. '86, on time, pulls into Bluefield, West Virginia, headquarters of the Pocahontas Division. In its consistent efforts to improve service, the N&W sends observers from its transportation department to study and record the train movements through the yards. One man, stationed at the head end, checks the time, technique, and work of handling the train from his observation post. The time it takes to inspect the train is recorded. Operations at the rear end are watched by a second observer. The speed and efficiency with which the cars for Bluefield are cut out of the train is studied for possible time saving. With the change of crew and equipment, the timing observation is complete. Time Freight 86 is on the move again, and N&W 50-450 rolls right along with it, headed for Roanoke. The observers get together to compare notes. The observations bring results. Daily performance proves it.
Along New River in Virginia, the Powhatan Arrow streaks by, one of our finest trains. A real fast streamliner that runs between Norfolk and Cincinnati. Our engineer and fireman check their readings of the automatic signals, and we gather speed as we roll through the rich New River Valley. Coal is the fuel we use and like, and I don't know a fireman who isn't proud of his ability to get peak efficiency out of it. When our engineer opens her up, he's dependent on work and skill and controls that he knows.
The locomotives are the handiwork of the designers, the builders, and the repairmen of the Norfolk and Western shops. Every time you see these men in a huddle, you know something better will come out of it. A better engine, improved consumption of fuel, faster handling of freight. In the shops, design reaches the most minute parts. The tool machines themselves are miracles of precision. If you must think of tons and miles, you also must think of milligrams and millimeters. You must think of correct weight and balance if you are to think of high-speed freights. To ensure the most efficient design and the finest workmanship, the Norfolk and Western builds all of its modern locomotives, including the giant Y6B.
86 proves the work in the shops as she slides through the switches into Roanoke. Roanoke, Virginia, hub of the Norfolk and Western. There's our shipment, still rolling. A crossroads location makes us one of the vital rail links of the nation. And we've got direct connections to the north and south, the east and the west. One of the more important operations in time freight railroading is the re-icing of perishables. The farmers and packers give us fresh fruits and vegetables to carry to market. We take pride in the fact that when we get them there, they're still fresh. Time Freight 86 is pushed up the hump, pushed up to a raised track, and cut apart into units which coast according to destination onto the many tracks to form new trains. Retarders slow the cars down to just the right speed for gentle handling. The tower operators handle the retarders and the switches. Scientific railroading, making up trains with a flick of the wrist. A lot of cars are added to 86. Many are cut out to join new trains. And through shipments stay with her all the way. N&W 50, 450 rolls over and down the hump too, back into a new 86 after only a single day on the road, making up now for the overnight run to Norfolk. You can set your watch fire as 86 leaves on time for the run to Tidewater.
Other time freights move out too, north to Hagerstown, Maryland, up the Shenandoah Valley, south to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, to Piedmont and the Midlands, southeast to Durham, and east to the ports of the Atlantic coast, southwest to Bristol and Northern Virginia, west to Columbus and Cincinnati, Ohio. The strength of the nation rides on the rails. The reapers gather the wheat and the rye, and the mills ship flour to stores throughout the land. Homes in the making speed over the shining steel. Industry needs its raw materials. Iron and aluminum wait the flats. Steel rides on steel. The fork trucks stack wool for carpets. Tank cars form a swiftly flowing stream of oil. Others move on to private sidings, bringing chemicals for drugs. The stacked carboys carry bleaches, solvents. Dealers need stock to sell, dry goods and washing machines. Detroit ships its cars. Wheels ride on wheels. King Coal rides the rails. Raw material, fuel, and power packed in a coal car. the whistle signal for the farm cow. Graders and threshers travel on flat cars. Trains haul tractors to work the land. Phosphate and potash arrive tonight. The telegraph sends the news. Fast freight rushing fence and wire. Feed for the stock, bran and oats and alfalfa. The speeding trains bear the strength of the nation.
It's 4:45 in the morning in the tower at Norfolk. 86 shows up on the board. The operator hangs out the welcome signal, and 86 rolls into town. And as you might expect, so does N&W 5450. More than 100 years of railroading is rolling through its second century on time.
Check N&W 5450 in.
This next film is a collection of authentic newsreel footage from the 1920s, showing the aftermath of train wrecks. In these dramatic pieces of railroad history, we get a close-up look at the destruction, the twisted hulks of steel, the giant locomotives capsized and silent, the cars bent and broken. Included here are the accurate accounts of how the wrecks were caused, some by weather, some by automobiles, steamrollers, and other trains, and some by simple human error. See the giant cranes work to clear the wreckage as crews labor to clear the tracks. This amazing film documents some of the earliest train accidents ever to be filmed. The carnage of twisted steel and splintered wood spread along the tracks is a grim reminder of the power that these steam locomotives could unleash. June 9th, 1920, Schenectady, New York. 15 were killed and scores injured when the New York Express, number 34, crashed into accommodation number 28 a few miles west of town about 1 o'clock in the morning. December 9th, 1923, Forsyth, New York. Crowds gathered near Forsyth, New York to see the aftermath of a spectacular train wreck. Nine were killed and 35 were injured when the third section of the 20th Century Limited plowed into the second section in the fog. March 14th, 1920, Bellows Falls, Vermont. This accident occurred when the train crew of extra freight number 28 southbound incorrectly read the train order, mistaking Bartonsville for Bellows Falls. While they should have waited at Bartonsville, instead they proceeded on south to meet up with northbound passenger number 165 at Bellows Falls. After searching through the wreckage, 10 bodies were eventually found. July 2nd, 1920, Millerton, New York. 10 persons were injured, none fatally, when train number 14 on the Harlan Division of the New York Central was derailed just south of Millerton. After leaving the rails, 2 day coaches and a smoker went down an embankment. August 13, 1926, Calverton, Long Island, New York. The eastbound Shelter Island Express, pulled by 2 steam locomotives, jumped the track near a switch not far from the Calverton station. Six persons were killed, 15 injured. The 2 engines and their train cars wobbled ahead off the rails for about 40 yards, then crashed into a nearby building before coming to a stop. A Pullman car and a combination baggage smoker turned on their sides, as did the locomotives. Giant derricks cleared away the wreckage in order to get the tracks open for future trains. March 23, 1922, Azusa, California. Train number 17, the Phoenix Flyer, was wrecked in the Azusa yards as it struck a steamroller belonging to the city. It had just rounded a bend 2 blocks to the east and was traveling at between 60 and 70 miles an hour. The slow-moving steamroller began crossing when all visible track was clear, but could not speed up to complete the crossing before the fast-moving passenger train got to the crossing. The engineer and foreman of the Flyer were killed, and the driver of the steamroller jumped to save his own life. March 30th, 1923, Columbus, Ohio. A Big 4 Flyer, westbound number 11, Boston to Cincinnati passenger train, struck a large touring automobile at a grade crossing. There were 6 fatalities. 3 of those were occupants of the car. The Flyer was running an hour late, due at Columbus at 7:50 a.m., and was one of the heaviest and finest trains operated by the Big 4. The engine left the tracks and turned over in the ditch, 4 Pullman sleepers piling on top of it. All cars of the train, with the exception of the diner, left the track. December 23, 1926, Rockmart, Georgia. The northbound Ponce de Leon crashed head-on into the southbound Royal Palm during a driving rainstorm. Cranes were brought in to remove the wrecked cars and get the lines reopened. Some 20 were killed and more than 50 injured, mostly in a diner and Pullman that were telescoped. August 20th, 1922, Gary, Indiana. An express train was derailed, and Russian and Italian strikers, according to news dispatches of the day, admitted to having removed spikes from the rails. The engineer and fireman were killed, and 2 express messengers were injured. Baggage and freight were salvaged from the wreckage when possible. August 1st, 1922, Cincinnati, Ohio. The collision occurred at about 10:30 in the morning. The engineer of the excursion train was said to have forgotten completely about the number 11, a local accommodation train coming down from Lebanon. The excursion train had no right-of-way against number 11 and should have waited on the double track at East Norwood. February 27, 1921, Porter, Indiana. The Canadian on the Michigan Central and the Interstate Express on the New York Central crashed at a diamond-shaped crosshead. The Michigan Central train had missed the block signals that were set against it and had been automatically derailed by a derail mechanism. There were 37 people killed. The Michigan Central train was bound for Toronto, Montreal, and Quebec. The speed of the New York Central train, 60 miles an hour, while fatal to the passengers in the two Michigan Central coaches, saved passengers in the rear of both trains. Most of the coach passengers were bound for local destinations rather than distant points.
The Iron Horse. What American does not thrill to the sight of a speeding train? That's how our next film, The Steam Locomotive, begins, and it's really the theme of American popular culture. The steam locomotive is the technology which transformed America from an agricultural backwater to the industrial powerhouse it is today. This is the technology that gave us bells and whistles in a literal sense, and is the object of affection like no other transportation technology was or ever will be. This film chronicles the development and the operation of the New York Central's famous 464 or Hudson-type locomotives. There were 275 of these that were considered by many to be America's finest and best steam locomotives. The producers of the film make a valiant attempt to explain how a steam locomotive operates. Some of this may be quite mysterious to people of a younger generation, but it made great sense to viewers in the 1930s and 40s when steam locomotives were a commonplace part of American life. We look at the key components. How does water get into the boiler in the form of the injector? How does lubrication work? How does the coal get into the firebox? And how are all these materials transported? We see a glimpse, just a glimpse, of the almost invisible infrastructure upon which the American railroad network depended. The machine shops, the roundhouses, the foundries, the rolling mills, the water and fuel service, the thousands, the tens of thousands of workers, skilled and unskilled, who really made up the backbone of the American railroad. At the time this film was produced, about 1.7 million Americans, about 1/5 of the industrial labor force, worked directly or indirectly for the railroads. The New York Central, one of the largest railroads in the country, was a key employer. We get a sense of the incredible diversity of skills and facilities necessary to support the operation of a far-flung railroad enterprise. From the machine shops and the heavy machine tools necessary to build and maintain steam locomotives and cars, through the thousands of miles of railroad track and infrastructure upon which the trains operated. These were essentially unseen. We took trains for granted. We rode them. We used the products that were transported by train, but most of us, then or today, never really worked in or confronted the day-to-day efforts of the railroad laborer and employee. When this film was produced, almost all the sights we see were a commonplace in American culture. But now, from the distance of 60 or 70 years, we get a glimpse of an America now departed, an industrial railroad age upon which this country depended, but which has disappeared along with the mournful whistle of the steam locomotive into the nostalgic memory of this country.
The steam locomotive is one of man's most valuable tools. He uses it to move heavy freight trains and fast passenger trains. In reality, this locomotive is a powerful steam engine mounted on wheels. A cross-section model of a steam locomotive shows us the firebox, the boiler, the largest part of the locomotive, and the many fire tubes passing through the boiler, the throttle valve, the smoke box, the smoke stack, the steam chest, and the cylinder. Hot gases and smoke from the firebox pass through the fire tubes, heating the water in the boiler, through the smoke box, and out the smoke stack. As the water is heated by the hot fire tubes, it expands, changing into steam. The steam collects in the top of the boiler and in the steam dome. The sliding round valve in the steam chest controls the flow of steam through the ports or openings connecting the steam chest with the cylinder. Steam entering the chest passes around the valve and through a port into the expansion chamber of the cylinder. The valve allows the steam to enter the cylinder first at one end, then the other. As the piston moves back and forth, the steam expands through the exhaust pipe, out the nozzle, and up the stack. The piston is fastened to the end of the piston rod. The other end of the piston rod is fastened to a sliding device called a crosshead. The main rod connects the piston rod with the driving wheel. When enough steam pressure is created in the steam dome, the engineer opens the throttle valve, allowing the steam to flow through a pipe to the steam chest. The steam flows past the valve into the cylinder, where it expands, forcing the piston ahead of it. The steam escaping through the smokestack gives the locomotive its chugging sound. Locomotives are taken to the engine terminal after every trip. They are moved in the engine terminal by an engineer called a hostler. They are stored and repaired in the roundhouse, where they are kept in separate stalls. A small locomotive called a mule or goat is used to move the cold or crippled engines. This one is moving a tender. Roundhouses are so called because of their semicircular shape, which is determined by the curve of the turntable pit. A sand tower stands between the incoming and outgoing tracks of the engine terminal. White, dry sand is stored in the tower to fill the sand domes of the locomotive. A valve in the tower is held open by a rope lever. It allows the sand to flow through the pipe into the sand dome. Sand is used for starting locomotives on slippery tracks. It is dumped in front of the drivers from pipes leading down from the sand dome. It is also blown through the fire tubes to clean out the soot, to improve the draft of the fire box. Oil-burning locomotives fill their fuel tanks from oil penstocks beside the tracks. The fuel oil is stored in large underground tanks. It is forced into the penstock by air pressure. Some large locomotive tenders hold more than 6,000 gallons of oil. Many locomotives burn coal. Coal is loaded into the tenders from overhead hoppers. Railroad locomotives use about 1/5 of all the coal and fuel oil produced in the United States. Locomotives use a great quantity of water to produce steam. Water penstocks with swinging spouts stand beside the tracks. Some locomotive tenders carry more than 20,000 gallons of water. It is necessary to refill them several times on long trips. After the locomotive has been serviced, it is run onto the turntable and turned around to its stall. The controls for the turntable are in the small cab on the side of the turning platform. The turntable operator locks the tracks together by forcing a locking bar between the rails. The hostler may not move the locomotive on or off the turntable until the operator motions for him to do so. The turntable operator pilots the locomotive in and out of the roundhouse. Inside the roundhouse, there are many loud hissing sounds made by steam escaping from valves on the locomotive. Columns of smoke rise from the black stacks of the waiting engines. The smoke escapes from openings in the roof called smoke jacks. When a locomotive is called for duty, the hostler backs it out of the stall onto the busy turntable. It is then turned around to the service track. The turntable is a long platform with a track across its center for the locomotive's wheels. It turns on a central pivot. Each end is supported by a wheel which runs on a track around the bottom of the pit. Some tables are moved by electric motors. Others are turned by gasoline motors. Locomotives must pass inspection before they are allowed to leave the terminal. On the service track, the locomotive is carefully checked by federal inspectors as an added safety precaution. Ladders are used to reach the higher parts of the locomotive. The side rods and other moving parts are tested by ringing them with a small hammer. The inspector's trained ears can tell if they are cracked or damaged by the ring of the steel. When the locomotive has been approved, it is again backed onto the turntable and turned around to the outgoing track, where it will be groomed for its next job. Railroad men are proud of their iron horses. Locomotives and tenders are carefully washed before each trip. Cleaning chemicals are sprayed from hoses. Long-handled brushes loosen the dirt, which is washed away by jets of water. Cleanliness is important to keep the locomotive strong and in good running condition. Sharp, sandy grit and dust that would grind away the metal are washed from the drivers and rods with boiling water. Hot water is used to loosen the oil and grease that holds the grit to the working parts of the locomotive. More than 5 million gallons of water, 68,000 pounds of cleaning chemicals, and 38,000 gallons of cleaning oil were used in 1 year to keep the locomotives clean at this one terminal. After the locomotive has been thoroughly washed, it is carefully wiped dry. Called weights are used by the wiper to clean and dry the engine. All the moving parts of the locomotive are oiled to make them work smoothly and reduce wear. Each time the locomotive stops, the engineer may be seen going over his engine with a long-nosed oil can. Engineers and firemen become very fond of their locomotives. They give them the best of care. When the locomotive is ready, the engineer climbs into the cab. With a full head of steam, the locomotive will chug out of the engine terminal, all shiny and bright, headed for the train yard.
Norfolk and Western was the last major railroad to use steam locomotives in regular freight and passenger train service. It had stayed with steam long after other lines had converted to diesel-electric locomotives because of the enormous deposits of coal in the territory along its lines. Coal-burning steam locomotive technology reached a pinnacle in the engines built at N&W's Roanoke shops, and several of these are depicted in this film. Power Behind the Nation celebrates the central role played by railroads in building the United States and the substantial place occupied by coal in America's economy of the 1950s. We still use lots of coal today, much of it to generate electric power, and America continues to have the largest coal deposits in the world. But it's no longer the everyday fuel for our homes and small businesses, as depicted in this rare glimpse back nearly 50 years. The Norfolk and Western was purchased in 1982 by a holding company that also owned the Southern Railway, and the two lines were slowly combined. By 1990, the old N&W had just about disappeared, integrated into the new Norfolk Southern Railway.
Centuries ago. An unknown land, its uncharted wilderness, a challenge. Now a leader of the world, a nation of 150 million people who enjoy as no one else anywhere the blessings of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. The United States of America, vast, rich, dynamic. All across this fabulous land, matchless cities rear lofty towers of hope and ambition in stone and steel, symbolic beacons of man's achievement under a system of free enterprise and representative government. Cities, centers of the nation's economic strength and cultural expression. Cities, clearinghouses for America's mammoth structure of industry, agriculture, and finance. Ocean to ocean, Canada to the Great Gulf, the land is an infinite treasury of natural resources. Productive timberlands cover 1/4 of the nation's land area, assure an adequate supply of forest products for myriad industries. Lakes, rivers refresh the land and serve the people. Rich stores of minerals, coal, copper, aluminum, iron, gold, silver, zinc, lead, manganese, and many, many more are wrested from the earth, skillfully converted into necessities and luxuries. These unsurpassed natural resources make America a colossus of productive power. From this fertile land, 9 million farmers produce an abundant variety of agricultural products. A bountiful supply of the bread and meat that makes Americans the best fed people on earth. Industrial America, the amazing accomplishment of inventive genius, built with the brain and brawn of a free, aggressive people. In 250,000 factories throughout the land, workers are turning out goods of incredible variety and quality. Industrial wealth beyond compare. And all of this vast agricultural and industrial development and production is dependent upon mass transportation. American railroads move anything, anywhere, anytime. They provide the most efficient, dependable transportation in the world. The purchasing power of the American people is unequaled anywhere. The American people work hard and spend freely. America is a nation of homes, large, small, modest, and pretentious. They represent comfort and security, a pleasant family life. Power behind this great nation is coal. Utilization of heat and power is a necessity to progress. In America, by far the greatest single source of heat and power is coal. A primary use of coal is in the home. Today, prepared coal is burned scientifically in modern, efficient furnaces fed by mechanical stokers. The domestic consumer demands an economic fuel of high quality, and he asks for equipment designed especially to burn it. Through extensive research and experimentation, the bituminous coal industry and the stoker manufacturer, working hand in hand, fulfill this consumer demand to provide the utmost in fuel satisfaction. Schools, factories, and office buildings are heated uniformly and economically with bituminous coal. Most large buildings burn especially prepared coal in furnaces fed by mechanical stokers. This prepared coal is clean. It leaves a minimum of ash and produces maximum heat. The experience of millions of users establishes that coal is the one fuel which is always dependable. Bituminous coal creates almost 50% of all the energy used to drive the wheels, generate the current, provide the light and power that American commerce requires. And some of it goes into the making of the world's tastiest hot biscuits, too. Our public utilities use bituminous coal as the primary agent for the production of gas and the generation of electrical power. Thus, coal's energy is transmitted into other forms. Coal is indispensable in the manufacture of iron and steel. Coke, a byproduct of coal, is used as a principal heating agent in producing steel from iron ore, steel for skyscrapers, steel for bridges, steel for railroads, for machinery and tools, for plows, steel for national defense. Coal is the major railroad fuel, providing the power behind that indispensable system of mass transportation. And it powers ships which plow the seven seas. But coal is far more than a fuel. It is the most prolific raw material known to chemistry. The magic of modern industrial chemistry has produced innumerable new products and better replacements for old ones. In today's byproduct plants, coal is burned in airless ovens. And from this wondrous mineral are extracted coke, gases, ammonia, and coal tar, basis for a multitude of modern chemicals. Coke and gas used as fuel are the greatest bulk byproduct of bituminous coal. Ammonia, versatile byproduct of coal, yields many amazing derivatives. Refrigeration agents for the preservation of meats and other perishables. Fertilizers, a major ammonia derivative. Plastics, camera film, lacquers. Explosives for mines, quarries, munitions. Coal tar is another major derivative of coal. It is used in the paving of smooth, long-lasting highways and in the form of creosote and the important preservation of wood. And coal tar is the miracle substance of modern industrial chemistry. Black magic can attest to. It is the source of an unbelievable variety of valuable products. From this black coal tar comes a rainbow range of colors and shadings of synthetic dyes. Synthetic flavors, too. Wintergreen, vanilla, almond, peppermint, and saccharin, the sweetest of them all. Modern medicine is thoroughly dependent on coal tar. The sulfa drugs, Ativan, aspirin, antiseptics, anesthetics, and countless other healing agents come from lowly coal tar. Yes, coal is a paradox. It is the basis for explosives and poison gases. Yet, from it come delicate perfumes, the breath of romance, no less varied than the odors of natural flowers. Beauty again, sheer, lovely hosiery spun from nylon, another magic creation from that black, smelly, sticky substance, coal tar. This amazing bituminous coal industry is the keystone in the economic structure of America. The industry in the United States has a capital investment in plant and property of over $4 billion. It employs 375,000 workers who are paid over $1.2 billion annually. And it spends over $100 million a year for supplies and equipment. Its direct and indirect employment combined provide a livelihood for some 4 million men and women who spend millions upon millions of dollars for food, for clothing, and for other necessities and luxuries of life. And this great industry is an example of enterprise free from monopoly. 5,000 companies operate 9,000 mines. Thousands of independent dealers throughout the country are in the business of selling and delivering coal to the consumer. And a host of manufacturers and dealers produce or sell coal-consuming equipment. Bituminous coal ranks above all other commodities in railroad tonnage and revenue. The railroads themselves use about 1/6 of the total annual production. Thus, the railroad and the coal industries are partners, each dependent upon the progress and welfare of the other. For centuries, the empire of black diamonds lay buried beneath the rugged mountains, inaccessible to the world until the railroad came. To serve the coal industry, the Norfolk and Western Railway spends many millions of dollars for efficient, adequate coal handling facilities. It designs, builds, and maintains in its own shop fleets of powerful coal-burning steam locomotives, especially designed for moving heavy tonnage trains. In the railway's great shops, workers build thousands of sturdy steel coal cars designed to meet the varied needs of shippers and receivers of coal. Normally, 14 cars roll off the N&W's Roanoke, Virginia shop assembly line in an 8-hour day, or one every 34 minutes. The railroad maintains great inland terminals. Through Portsmouth, Ohio, 102 miles of track with 10,000 car capacity flows about 2/3 of all the coal handled by the railway. In addition to inland terminals, the Norfolk and Western tidewater facilities at Lambert's Point, near Norfolk, Virginia, are rated among the finest in the world. With considerably more than half the world's known coal reserves and a stupendous industrial demand, the United States of America occupies first place among the coal-producing countries of the world, accounting for nearly 1/3 of the annual world production. Its value exceeds that of our combined annual production of gold, silver, copper, and iron. Richest in point of value are the coal deposits of the eastern area, containing probably 9/10 of the high-ranked coal of the country. The Appalachian region, from northern Pennsylvania into Alabama, is a huge depository of bituminous and semi-bituminous coals of the highest rank. Heart and center of this region is the territory served by the Norfolk and Western Railway, on whose lines are mined the world-famed Pocahontas, Tug River, Upper Buckhannon, Thacker, Canova, and Clinch Valley coals, so universally accepted as the criteria of fuel satisfaction. The mountains of southern West Virginia, western Virginia, and eastern Kentucky are dotted with hundreds of coal tippers. Let's follow these men into the mines and see how coal is produced. In this shaft mine, the workers enter cages or elevators and descend hundreds of feet into the earth to their job. Drift mine entries shoot horizontally into the sides of mountains. In both drift and shaft mines, the men ride electric trains underground to the points of operation. The modern coal mine is a far cry from the days when miners laboriously hauled coal with mule and cart. A man of tremendous importance in coal mining is the experienced safety inspector, better known as the fire boss. His job starts long before the miners begin working. Before each shift enters the mine, before a single passage is worked, he carefully checks for gas. He uses an extremely sensitive instrument, the methane detector. His okay must be on the face of the coal before operations begin. At the working face of a coal seam, the first operation is cutting. This huge alligator-like machine with swift revolving blades is moved to the coal face and cuts deep gashes across the bottom and center of the coal to be blasted, thus increasing the efficiency of the charge of dynamite or compressed air to come. During the cutting operation, the machine operator tests once more for gas. Sometimes the cutting machine is used to shear the face vertically. With either vertical or horizontal cuts, the coal blasts down evenly with only a little explosive and without excessive breakage. Now the miner drills holes in the working face so that charges can be placed to blast the greatest amount of coal with the least explosive. The charge is tamped into the drilled holes carefully, and electric fuses are connected to a battery box. The switch goes down, the coal is blasted, and a pile of black lumps will soon become a prepared fuel product. After sturdy wooden props have been erected to prevent slate falls, one of the newest of mining machines is pushed into place, the automatic coal loader. Then a string of empty cars moves up to the fallen coal, and the loader begins its magic work. A water spray is used to eliminate dust. Motors collect the loaded cars from the working faces and assemble them into strings. Throughout the day and night, these long trains come rolling from the depths. Over 500 million tons a year in the United States, a continuous flow of bituminous coal. In shaft mines, loaded cars are hauled to the elevator, and up they go, hundreds of feet to the top of the shaft, where they are automatically dumped into a chute leading to the tipple. In drift or horizontal mines, loaded trains buzz from the interior and sometimes run several miles along the mountainside before reaching the top of the tipple, called the head house. At the head house, each car is run to a rotary dumper and quickly turned over. The coal spills into a conveyor belt, Another example of the newer mining equipment. And the car quickly returns to the track as another takes its place. The belt conveys the coal without breakage or dust. Shaker screens on the tipple grade the coal according to size: flax, pea, nuts, stoves, egg, and lump. The smaller sizes are washed by air or water to eliminate foreign matter. Larger sizes pass directly to the picking tables, where keen-eyed experts spot and remove slate and rock. After the washing and cleansing, coal is re-screened, assuring a clean, uniformly sized product. Coal passes next to a flexible loading boom poised above railroad cars. It flows gently and evenly into the big cars as automatic sprays sprinkle it with oil or other chemicals. This is the famed dustless treatment, the final operation in the production of clean fuel satisfaction. Thus, the process of mining, grading, and preparation is completed. The finished product is ready to roll. From the myriad spur lines up hidden mountain hollows, from more than 100 mines in southern West Virginia, western Virginia, and eastern Kentucky, come the mine trains to assemble in the great inland yard. Then the mightiest steam power of the Norfolk and Western Railway begins its long trip for hundreds of miles over the steep mountain grades across the Alleghanies, westward to the great manufacturing centers and to the lake ports, eastward to other centers of industry, and down to the sea. A railroad, a potent driving force with a tremendous job to do. A job that is carried on every hour of every day and in the darkness of night, in rain and sleet and burning sun, swiftly and efficiently. Without the railroad, there could be no mass movement of this vital commodity. From the steep peaks to the hilly lands, to the broad valleys, to the coastal plains, trains rush toward the sea with their cargoes of black diamond. Most impressive of all Norfolk and Western coal handling facilities is the great ocean terminal at Norfolk, Virginia. Here, the interminable strings of loaded cars rush from the west to meet the steady stream of ocean-going vessels. Here, the coal commerce of America rubs elbows with other commerce of our own land and the nations of the world. Vast, complex, a maze of tracks converging on gigantic steel piers, thrusting their girders over deep water. This is Lambert's Point. Let's see what takes place when ships come here for coal. As the ship approaches, yard crews shift cars into position from which they drift by gravity to the scale. Meanwhile, a sturdy tug moves over the blue water to meet the freighter. It shepherds the ship to the pier, recognized as one of the most modern and efficient coal piers in existence. The tug noses her big charge alongside. It is docked, and loading operations are ready to begin. Now the cars of coal ordered for this ship are rolling slowly across the scale. an automatic instrument of wondrous precision weighs each car. Weights are transmitted by telautograph to the pier office. The car drifts on down to the Barney hump. The cars are carried through this entire operation by remote control. The Barney, sometimes called the mule, emerges from the pit and pushes the coal car up the incline. The car drifts through the steam thawing shed used to facilitate dumping in cold weather. Emerging, it passes upon a retarding device which slows it down. The switch is thrown, the mechanical brain controlling the amazingly synchronized operation is in motion. The great pan which will receive the coal is lowered to the ship. As each car passes the pier office, it is finally checked off as delivered to the ship. Entering the elevator, the loaded car bumps off a returned empty and is automatically locked into position. The elevator ascends. A rubber-covered retarding device on the great pan moves into position to receive the coal. Now the car with its top covered with an overlapping hood is turned on its side. The coal slowly spills out the gate of the hood, rolls gently into the pan. The retarder backs slowly before the coal, easing it into the telescopic chute. An automatic chemical sprinkler adds an exact moisture content to meet specific demands. Now the great telescopic chute, filled with coal, moves closer to the ship's deck. It is projected slowly down into the deep hold of the vessel. This chute is a huge and intricate mechanism, but highly flexible. The tremor, or conveyor, slides from the chute's mouth. The tremor, another of the coal distribution industry's newest machines, is almost human, as it directs the flow of coal to the farthest corners of the hold and spreads it evenly. The long trip from mine to ship's hold is complete. The empty car is lowered to the pier track level and is bumped from the elevator by the oncoming loaded car. The empty rolls down the incline and up the switchback. It reverses direction and rolls back on the return track into the empty yard, soon to rejoin a train of other empties for the journey west, back to the mountains and the mines to be loaded again and again in the endless cycle of production. The ship is full, the job is done, and soon this great coal carrier will steam out to sea. But other ships will come to take more cargoes of coal. Coastwise ships from the north and south, and ships from afar off across the 7 seas. For the need for coal is universal, and the fame of fuel satisfaction is world-renowned. And so, in a world where the power of harnessed energy is vital to progress, the United States of America looks with pride upon its vast stores of unexcelled coal. For coal is power. It is the greatest single source of heat and energy convertible to the needs of mankind. By the use of coal, man has made iron his slave. And by the use of iron, man rules the world. Through the wizardry of modern industrial chemistry, coal now emerges as the most useful raw material known to man, a prolific source of an infinite variety of valuable materials. Without coal in abundance, industrial development as it exists in the United States today could not have been possible. The Norfolk and Western Railway is proud of its contribution to the nation's progress in providing indispensable transportation for coal, the power behind the greatest nation on earth.